Hello there. Let us continue solving questions on iteration statements. And currently, we're on the nested loop patterns category. And in this category, we have already solved questions from these subcategories. In this video, we will take up questions in the center aligned inverted triangle subcategory, where we will solve these questions. So let's get started with the first question from the list. So this is what we are supposed to print for n equal to 5. Now, what is the next step? Well, the next step is what we have been doing so far. That is to draw a grid around this. That is, have some rows and some columns, then number the rows, then number the columns, and try to find a relation between the row number, the column number, and what we are supposed to print. So let me quickly draw a grid around this and then continue the discussion. So this is how the pattern would look like with a grid drawn around it. As you can see, for n equal to 5, we have got 5 rows. And the row number is starting from 0 and going all the way up to n minus 1, which is 4 in this case. The number of columns here is 9, right? Starting from 0 and going all the way up to 8. So now let us take a look at what we are supposed to print in each row. Well, in each row, what we're supposed to print is some asterisk, of course, right? And as you can see, there's some space between them. So in the first row, for example, what we're supposed to print is an asterisk and then a space, then another asterisk and then a space. And this holds true for the entire row, right? Now, what about the second row? In the second row, we are printing a space first and then an asterisk and then a space, then an asterisk, a space, space, asterisk, and lastly a space, right? Then if we take a look at the third row, what do we see? We're printing two spaces, right? In the last row, that is row number 2, we printed one space. Here we're printing two spaces. Then we are printing an asterisk and then a space, an asterisk and a space, an asterisk, and lastly two spaces. Then in the fourth row, we are printing some spaces. How many spaces? We're printing 3. And then we're printing an asterisk, a space, an asterisk, and then 3 spaces. And if we take a look at the last row, what do we have? We've got 4 spaces, 1 asterisk, and 4 spaces at the end, right? So now let us note this observation down somewhere so that we can take a look at them and try to find a relation between them. So what did we observe was for I equal to 0, which is the first row, what we had to do was we had to print 5 asterisks, and each of these asterisks had a space between them, right? So let us put it this way. The number of asterisks that we are printing is 5. And let's not worry much about the space between each asterisk. When we print an asterisk, we will assume that every pair of asterisk has to be separated by a space, right? So let's keep this as an assumption and let's just focus on the number of asterisks that we are printing in the first row, which is 5. Now let's talk about the second row, which means when I is 1, what are we doing? Well, when I is 1, we're printing a space first, and then we are printing a few asterisks separated by spaces, right? So if we have to note this down, what should we note is that we are printing 1 space and 4 asterisks, right? That's what we are doing. And when I say we are printing 1 space, I'm not talking about all the spaces that we are going to print at the end. What I'm talking about is the fact that we're printing 1 space first, and then we are starting to print asterisk, right? And each of these asterisks will be separated by a space. That is something that we have discussed already, and we're taking that as an assumption. That is, when we print a pair of asterisks, it will be separated by a space. So the conclusion is in the second row, that is when I is 1, we are first of all printing a space, and then we are printing 4 asterisks separated by spaces. Now, what about this last space that we have? Well, we need not worry about this, because if we print a space and then an asterisk and a space and then asterisk space and then asterisk space and then lastly asterisk, do we really need to care about this last space? Not really, right? even if we don't print it explicitly, our pattern would look absolutely fine, right? Now, let's talk about the third row, that is when I is 2. When I is 2, what are we doing is we're printing two spaces first, right? So let's say I2, we're printing two spaces, and let me quickly move this around and put it before A. So let's put it this way. So what we were discussing was when I is equal to 2, we're printing two spaces first. Now, what about the number of asterisks? We're printing 1, 2, 3, 3 asterisks. So when I is 2, we're printing 3 asterisks. Then when I is 3, we're printing three spaces first and then two asterisks. So when I is 3, we're printing three spaces and two asterisks. And lastly, when I is 4, we're printing four spaces and one asterisk. So when I is 4, we're printing four spaces and one asterisk. So with this discussed, what would be the next step? Now we know how many asterisks do we need to print in any given row, and we also know how many space would we need to print before we start printing the asterisk, right? Summarizing, when I is 0, we don't need to print any space. So let's put 0 over here, and we need to print 5 asterisks when I is 0, and each of those asterisks has to be separated by a space, right? Then when I is 1, we have to print one asterisk first and then start printing asterisk followed by spaces, right? And when I is 2, we'll print two spaces first and then start printing asterisk followed by spaces. Something similar holds for I equal to 3 and I equal to 4, right? And like I have said, we don't need to worry about the spaces at the end, because even if we don't take care of it, that is, even if we don't print it explicitly, our pattern will look absolutely fine. So with this clear, let's continue our discussion and then try to figure out a relation between I, that is the value of I, and the number of space that we're supposed to print for that value of I, right? And if you notice, you would see a clear relation between I and S. And that relation is that I is equal to S, right? That is, the number of space that we're printing in the beginning of any row is equal to the row number, considering that we are starting from 0 and then going all the way up to n minus 1, right? So this is one of the relations that we would need to keep in mind. So let me put that down over here. For space, the relation is I equal to S, right? Now, let us focus our attention to the row number, which is denoted by I, and the number of asterisks that we have to print in that row. For that, let me make some space over here, and then let me put this and this side by side so that it's easier to figure out a relation between them. So for I equal to 0, we have to print 5 asterisks. For I equal to 1, we have to print 4. For 2, 3, 3, 2, and 4, 1, right? Now, if you take a look at these, you would notice that when you add the value of I and A, you get 5. And this holds true for all of the values of I and A that we have over here, right? And this 5 that we are getting is not a random number. It is coming from the fact that n equal to 5. What I mean is, if n was 6 instead, what would have happened is, in the first row, you would have printed 6 asterisks, right? And if you're printing 6 asterisks, when you add I and the number of asterisks you're printing, you're going to get 6, which is equal to the value of n, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I plus A is going to give us n, which means that if you know n and if you know I, you can determine the number of asterisks that you have to print using this expression, right? So can we note this down as well? We can. The number of asterisks that we have to print is n minus I, given we know the value of n and I, right? So what have we discussed so far? We've discussed that this is what we're supposed to print, and to be able to print this, we'll have to print some spaces at the beginning of each row and some asterisk followed by space after that, right? What I mean is, if we take, for example, row number 4, where I is 3, what do we have to do is, we have to print 3 spaces and then asterisk followed by a space and then another asterisk, right? So we have discussed how to determine the number of space that we have to print, and we have also discussed how to determine the number of asterisks that we will need to print. The only thing that is left to determine is how are we going to take care of printing a space between any pair of asterisks. So let's talk about that. And for that, let me take the first row as an example. So in the first row, this is what we are supposed to print, right? Now there are two ways in which we can print this. The first is this, where we print an asterisk and then separately print a space, then another asterisk, then another space, and we keep on doing this for all 5 asterisks that we have. So at the end, this is what it will look like. So here, what do we have? We have got 5 asterisks, and all of the asterisks are separated by a space, right? This is one of the ways. What is the other way? The other way is this, where what we do is we print an asterisk and a space together, which means this gets printed together and then this gets printed together. So let me put that down over here quickly. Now here, what do we have? We have got 5 asterisk space, right? So like I said, we've got two options. This is the first option and this one is the second option. So let's take a look at the first option and compare it with what we actually want. This is what we want to print. That is, we want to print 5 asterisks and each of them would be separated by a space. So if we handle it this way, that's exactly what we will get. That is, we will get 5 asterisks and each of those 5 asterisks would be separated by a space, right? So this is doing what we exactly need. Now let's also take a look at the second one. This second approach that we talked about contains an asterisk and a space together. That is, we won't just print an asterisk and then a space. We will print an asterisk and a space together. What I mean is, this is what we are going to say. System.out.print asterisk, a space, and that is it, right? So if we do this, what's going to happen? What we need is 5 asterisks, and we are getting 5 asterisks over here. Then what we also need is spaces between those asterisks, right? And we are getting that as well. If you see, this is a space between this and this asterisk. This is a space between this and this asterisk, and so on. The only, should I say, problem here is that we are getting a space at the end. But is that really a problem? What I'm asking is, if I put a space over here, is that going to affect how our pattern looks like? Not at all, right? So if putting an extra space over here does not affect the ultimate output that we want, we should focus on the way which is simpler, right? And if we compare this and this is a simpler approach. That is, you know that you have to print 5 asterisks and spaces between them. So instead of taking care of printing 5 asterisks and spaces between them individually, what we do is we print 5 asterisk space. That will take care of printing the 5 asterisk and the 4 space that we need, and also an extra space at the end, which is not really going to affect the pattern that we want to print, right? So what do we conclude from this? From all of this, we conclude that when we start printing, what will we do is this. We'll print an asterisk and a space together, right? So with all of this discussion done, what is the next step? The next step is writing the pseudocode. So for that, let me come back here and let me clear this quickly. And then let's come back here and check the value of n, which is 5. And we know that if the value of n is 5, we need 5 number of rows, right? And to take care of the rows, we will have a loop. And that loop would look like this. We would say for I equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus, right? What will this give us? This will give us the value of I as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is what we want, correct? Then what we need is we need to print each row. And in each row, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to print some spaces, then some asterisks separated by spaces, right? And we know that for each row, which is denoted by I, the number of space that we need to print in that row is equal to the value of I itself, right? So in each row, first of all, we will print some spaces. Now, we know that the relation between the value of I and the number of space that we have to print is this. That is, the number of space that we have to print is equal to the value of I. So what can we do is we can run a loop for printing the required number of spaces, right? And how would that loop look like? That loop would look like this. We'll have another variable j, which starts from 0. And what do we need to do is we need to print I number of spaces. So we will start from 0 and go all the way up to I minus 1, right? This is what I mean. Can I say j equal to 0, j less than I, j plus plus? We can, right? And let me show you what the values of j will be for different values of I. So when I is 0, what are we doing is j starts from 0 and j goes all the way up to less than 0, which means that if j starts from 0 and if the value of I is 0, j less than I will become false, which means this loop won't run at all for I equal to 0. And that means the number of space that we will be printing is 0. Then when I equal to 1, what's going to happen is j will start from 0. So j will start from 0 and it will go all the way up to less than I. Since I is 1, j will start from 0 and go all the way up to 0 only, which means it will iterate only once. And with that, we'll be able to print just one space. Then when I is 2, j will start from 0 and go all the way up to 1, right? Because this is j less than I. So here we'll print two spaces. Then when I is 3, it will be 0, 1, 2. So three spaces and so on, which means this loop seems fine to achieve what we are trying to, that is printing the required number of spaces. Now, all that we will have to do is put a system.out.print here and just print a space, right? So this loop will take care of the number of spaces that we have to print at the beginning of each row, right? Which means that if we take, let's say, fourth row again, what's going to happen is the value of I will be 3, which means j will go from 0 all the way up to 2. And in each iteration, we are printing a space. So it will print a space here, here, and here. And then the cursor would be here, which means that right after we finish printing the space, we should start printing the asterisk space combination that we had talked about, correct? Which means that since this is system.out.print, what's going to happen is it will print three spaces and the cursor would be here. So right after this loop ends, we will start printing the asterisk. So here will be the logic for printing the asterisk. Now, talking about printing the asterisk, there's two things that we need to consider. The first is the number of asterisks that we are going to print for any given value of I, which we know is n minus I, and the way we are going to print it, which is asterisk and a space together, right? So all we will have to do here is put a loop. The loop will say j equal to 0, j less than n minus I, j plus plus, and what we will have to do here is we'll have to put system.out.print and we will say asterisk space, and that is it, right? And at the end, of course, we'll have to put a system.out.println, because what we want is that at the end of each row, the cursor shifts to the next line, right? So this is the pseudocode that is going to help us in printing this pattern. So with the pseudocode discussed and hopefully understood, let us go to IntelliJ. Let's start writing the code. So over here, let's expand src and iteration statement and questions. Here we have nested loop patterns. And what are we going to do is we're going to create a package with the name center align inverted triangle. So let's copy this first of all. This is center align triangle. And let's create new package. Let's put the name as center aligned inverted triangle. Now here we'll create a new Java class. We'll say Q1, right? And here we'll have a main method. Now what are we supposed to do is take n and let's initialize it to 5. And then what we will have to do is put the outer loop. So it will be I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. Now the first thing that we'll have to take care of is printing the spaces. So we know that this can be done with a loop that would look like this. J equal to 0, j less than I, j plus plus, and all we will have to do here is say system.out.print and print a space. Then here we would take care of printing the asterisk. So this is going to look like this: int j equal to 0, j is less than n minus I, j plus plus, and we will have to print an asterisk and a space together, and this will be system.out.print and not println, right? And at the end of this loop, what we will have to do is put an empty println statement so that the cursor moves to the next line, right? So with this done, if I run the code, what do we expect? Well, this is what we expected, right? So we have been able to solve the first question. So with this done, let us now move on to the next question. So this is what we're supposed to print when n equal to 5. And if you notice, you would see that the way this will get printed is similar to the last question that we had solved. It's just that over here, we're printing some letter in each of the row. And over there, all we were doing was printing asterisk, right? So now that we know how to take care of printing a few spaces at the beginning of each row and how to take care of printing spaces between the characters that we are printing in any given row, let us try to determine the letter that we will have to print in a given row, right? But before I get started with that, let me quickly make some space over here. So take a look at this. What you notice is where in the first row, what are we doing? All we are doing is printing E. In the second row, we are printing D. Then in the third row, we are printing C. Fourth, B, and fifth, we are printing A, right? So in the first row, for example, we're printing E is what I said, and we are printing E only, nothing else. That is, when we are on the first row, all we will have to do is determine what to print, and then that is the only thing that we are going to print, correct? Then when we move on to the second row, we are printing D, which is different from what we printed in the previous row. So again, when we are on the second row, we will have to determine what to print and then print only that, right? So what is the next step? Well, the next step is to determine what to print in that given row, correct? So for that, let's take a look at the row number and what we are supposed to print. And let me write it down over here. So when I is 0, the character that we are going to print is E. When I is 1, we are going to print D. When I is 2, we are going to print C. I3, we are going to print B. And I4, we are going to print A, right? And this would be the case when n equal to 5. What I mean is, if n was 6 instead, what would have happened is when I is 0, the character that we would have printed would have been F, right? And then for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we would have printed F, and then E, D, C, B, and A, right? So when I say when I is 0, we need to print E, I mean that in that case, the value of n is 5, right? So we'll have to keep that in mind as well, because we have just seen that what we print in any given row is dependent on the row number, but it is also dependent on the value of n, right? So for now, let's just assume that n is 5 and try to find a relation between the row number and what we are supposed to print. And then later, we'll also take into consideration that the value of n can change, and we'll find a generic expression that would give us what to print on any given row, given the row number and the value of n, right? So when I is 0, we're supposed to print E. Now E is a character. Its integer representation or its ASCII representation would be 69, right? Similarly for D, it would be 68, for C, 67, B, 66, and A, 65, right? So what can we see is when I is 0, we're printing 69. Then when I is 1, we're printing 68, I2, 67, I3, 66, I4, 65, right? So if you compare the values of I and what we are supposed to print, that is the ASCII representation of what we are supposed to print, you would notice that I plus the character that we are supposed to print is coming out to be 69 in this case, right? So can we put it down this way? I plus the character that we're supposed to print is 69. So now the next question is, where is this 69 coming from? Well, for that, let's take a look at this. Now, irrespective of the value of n, the last row will always be A, right? Because we know that if n is equal to 5, the first row is E, and then it goes all the way up to A. If n would have been 6 instead, the first row would have been F, and then it would have gone all the way up to A, right? So can we say that the last row would always be A? Then that means the second last row would always be B. The third last would be C, and so on, correct? Now, because there are a total of 5 rows and the last row has A, we can say that the first row is actually A plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, which means the first row is A plus 4, right? I said A plus 1, plus 1, which is 2 in total, plus 1, which is 3, plus 1, which is 4, right? So this is A plus 4. So can I write 69 as this? Can I say A plus 4? We can, right? Now we got rid of one constant, that was 69, but we got another one, which is 4 over here. So now let's try to determine where is this 4 coming from. And for that, let's take a look at this again. Now what happened was, last row is A, so the second last row is plus 1. Third last row is plus 1 of that, which is plus 2 in total. So plus 3 here and plus 4, right? Now, instead of n equal to 5, if we had n equal to 6, what would have happened is, last row would have been A, and here it would have been F. So in between, it would have been E, D, C, and B. So it would have been A plus 1, which is 2, plus 1, which is 3, plus 1, which is 4, plus 1, which is 5, right? So instead of A plus 4, we would have A plus 5. So do you see a pattern over here? When n is equal to 5, we got A plus 4. So forget about A for now. Let's just focus on 4. So when n is equal to 5, we got 4. When n is equal to 6, we got 5. So can we say, given a value of n, this would be A plus n minus 1? We can, right? So let me note this down as A plus n minus 1. Now this will take care of the first row that we're going to print, right? So let me clear this up a little bit. And over here, let's put A plus n minus 1, right? Now, what about the second row? The second row has got 68, which is just one less than whatever we printed in the previous row. So can we say A plus n minus 1 minus 1? We can, right? Because what would this give us is 65 plus n, which is 5. So 70 minus 1 is 69, minus 1 is 68, right? So this is how we can write it as. Then the next one would be A plus n minus 1 minus 1 minus 1, right? And that's how it would continue. So again, what we were trying to do was find a generic expression, but currently the expression is not generic. So let's try to make it generic. For that, let's take a look at the second row. When I is 1, we're supposed to print 68, because of which we're going to go for A plus n minus 1 minus 1, right? So we're going for minus 2. Or we can say that we're going for A plus n minus 1, which is what we had over here, minus 1, right? Similarly, here it is A plus n minus 1 minus 2, correct? So if you compare this, that is the one that we have with I, you would see that whatever we are subtracting from A plus n minus 1 is the value of I itself. What I mean is, to get, for example, 66, what we would do is we would go for A plus n minus 1. This would be there. And then we would go for minus I, which is minus 3, right? So this would give us 65 plus 5 is 70, minus 1 is 69, minus 3 is 66. So the generic expression ultimately would be this. It would be A plus n minus 1 minus I, right? And you can take this expression, you can take the value of n and you can take different values of I for that value of n, and you would see that this is holding fine for any given value of n and its corresponding values of I, right? So all of this discussion combined, what can we conclude is, given n is equal to 5, if we are supposed to print this, what we will have to do is we will have to determine the letter that we are going to print in that row. Now that can be done with the help of this expression, which is a plus n minus 1 minus I, right? Now, once we know the letter that we are supposed to print in any given row, all we will have to do is take care of printing the required number of spaces at the beginning of the row, and then we would have to print that letter followed by a space, which is exactly what we did in the last question. It's just that over there we were not printing a letter, we were printing asterisk only, right? So with all of this discussed, we're ready to write the code for this. And for that, let's come back to IntelliJ. Let's create a new Java class, call it Q2, and let me copy the main method from here because we're going to use quite a lot of it. Now over here, we will need to print the number of spaces, right? It's just that we don't need to print any asterisk here. We'll have to print a letter. And we also know how to determine which letter to print, right? So let's say char letter. This is going to be A plus n minus 1 minus I, right? And what we will have to do is we'll have to convert this, because this will give us integer at this point. We'll have to convert this to a char. So we'll say this. So this will give us the letter, and we will take that letter, print it with a space. And that is all that we will have to do to be able to print this. So let's run the code and check if it is working fine or not. And it is. This is what we got, which is exactly what we had expected, right? So with this done, let's move on to the next question, which is this. So for n equal to 5, this is what we're supposed to print. Now again, it is similar to the previous two questions that we had solved, in the sense that we would need to print some spaces at the beginning of each row, and then we would print some character separated by a space in each row, right? And printing some spaces at the beginning of each row is something we know already. So let us focus on determining what to print in each row, right? Now, for that, again, let me make some space over here. Okay, so let's take a look at the first row. What are we supposed to print in the first row is A, B, C, D, and E. So we're printing from A all the way up to E. Then what are we supposed to print in the second row? We're supposed to print from A all the way up to D. Then in the third row, we're supposed to print from A all the way up to C, then from A all the way up to B, and lastly from A all the way up to A, right? Now, in the previous question, which was this, in the first row, we were printing E, second D, third C, B, and lastly A. So can we use whatever we had discussed over here to print this? We can, right? Because if you see, in the first row, we're printing from A to E, second, we're printing from A to D, and so on, which means for any given row, we'll start printing from A, right? And we will go on printing up to a different character depending on the row that we are on, correct? So if you compare this, you would see that the character that we are ending at is exactly the same as the character that we are printing in each row in the last question, right? So what I'm saying is, in every row, we'll start from A. So we would say from A all the way up to a certain character. And that character can be determined from the expression that we had derived over here, right? So this is something that we can use to solve this question. That is all that we will have to do. What we can say is we always start from A. We determine a character to go until, and let's say this is start, this is end. We start printing from S and we go all the way up to E, right? Now the next question is, given, let's say start is A and end is, for example, E, how do we print it? So we know that A would be 65 and E would be 69. So can we say we have a loop something like this? J is equal to, sorry, not 0. J is equal to start, which in this case would become 65, and J less than equal to end, which in this case would become 69. And what we do is we go for plus plus. So in the first iteration, J would be 65. We print 65. That is A. In the second iteration, J would become 66. We print 66, which would be B. And that is how we continue, right? So with this discussed, let's come back to IntelliJ and let us create a Java class. Let's call it Q3 and let's copy the logic from Q2. Over here, let's paste it and we will need this space. We'll need this letter. Now, this letter would be the last letter, right? That is the letter that we need to go up to starting from A. So because we have this letter determined, what would we need to do over here is instead of saying J equal to 0, would say J equal to A. And then instead of saying J less than N minus I, what we would say is J less than equal to letter, right? And we would say J plus plus. Now, what would we have to do next is we would have to print J, right? We're not printing letter, we're printing J. And J would start from A and go all the way up to the determined letter, which depends on the number of rows that we are supposed to print and the current row that we are on, right? So let me run the code at this point and see the output that we get. Well, the output is numbers, which is not surprising because if you see, this is letter, which is a character. But what we are doing is we are initializing J to be A. And since J is an integer, J will be initialized to 65, right? And then if it is initialized to 65, and then we increment it, what would we get? We would get 66, then 67, then 68, and then 69. And because we are printing J, we are getting this. So this is not surprising, right? This is expected. Now, if we want to print the letter instead, what will we have to do is we'll have to typecast this. We'll have to say char J, right? And if I do that and run the code, this is what we get, which is exactly what we wanted. So this is how we can solve this question. And with this completed, let's move on to the next one, which is this. So this is what we're supposed to print when n equal to 5, right? Now, this is in some way similar to the previous question that we had solved. And it is similar to the previous questions only in one aspect, that is printing some spaces at the beginning of the row. But the other aspect, which is printing the character itself in the row, it is different. Because if we take a look at the last question, there was a space between any character, sorry, any pair of characters that we had printed. But over here, that is not the case. The entire row is filled with asterisk, right? Something similar holds true for the second, third, fourth, and the last row, right? So to be able to print this, we would need to print some spaces at the beginning of the row, which is something we know already. But other than that, we would also have to determine the number of asterisks that we need to print in that row. Now, since we already know how to print the number of spaces at the beginning of the row, the only thing that we have to do is determine this part, right? That is the number of asterisks in a given row. So for that, let's take a look at the row number and the number of asterisks that we are printing. So when I is 0, we're printing 9 asterisk. When I is 1, we're printing 7. For 2, printing 5. For 3, 3. And for 4, we're printing 1, right? So if you take a look from starting from the last row, you would see the last row has got 1, which would be the case irrespective of the value of n. What I mean is, if n was 6 instead, the last row would have been row number 5, and this would have 1 asterisk. The previous one, that is the one before that, would have 3. This would have 5. This would have 7. This would have 9, and this would have 11 ultimately, right? So let's come back to this. N being 5, which means the first row would have 9 number of asterisk, right? Now, what did I say just now is for N5, the first row, let's write it as FR, would have 9 asterisks. When N would be 6, the first row would have 11 asterisks, right? And if I ask you what would be the number of asterisks in the first row, for n equal to 7, what would your answer be? Well, it would be 13, right? And this is how it would go. Now, if we know the number of asterisks in the first row, can we determine the number of asterisks in the second row? We can, right? Because if you see the asterisk in the first row and the asterisk in the second row, the difference is the first and the last asterisk was removed, and in a way the entire thing was copied over to the second row, right? And if you compare second and third, that's what you would see. The first asterisk and the last asterisk got removed, and the rest of the portion just got copied over to the third row, and that is how it continued, right? So if we know the number of asterisks in one row, we can determine the number of asterisks in the next row, correct? So what did we discuss so far? We discussed that the number of asterisks in the first row would vary depending on the value of n. Then we also discussed that if we know the number of asterisks in one row, we can determine the number of asterisks in the next row. And that is simple. All we will have to do is take the number of asterisks in the previous row and go for -2, right? So if we know this, we can determine this. If we know this, we can determine this, and so on. So the only thing that is left for now is determining the number of asterisks in the first row. For that, let's come back over here. And if you take a look at these two, you would notice a very clear relation. That is, the number of asterisks in the first row is 2 multiplied by the value of n minus 1, right? So if n is 5, it is 10 minus 1, which is 9. If n is 6, it is 12 minus 1, which is 11. N 7, it is 13, and so on, right? So using this, that is 2 multiplied by n minus 1, you can determine the number of asterisks in the first row. So let me put it down somewhere here for now. And let me put other information as well over here. So n is equal to 5. First row would have 2 multiplied by n minus 1 asterisk, right? Or let's just put it as I equal to 0. And let's put this as the number of asterisk for I equal to 0 given n equal to 5. Now, when I is equal to 1, what would this be? This would be 2 multiplied by n minus 1 minus 2. We know this, right? Because that is what we had discussed over here. So whatever is the number of asterisks in the previous row minus 2 would give you the number of asterisks in the current row. Then if we continue this, and let me remove this entirely. So for 2, this would be 2 multiplied by n minus 1 minus 4, right? Why? Because this is minus 2, and then minus 2 would give us minus 4. Similarly, if we go further, we would get this 2 multiplied by n minus 1 minus 6, and so on, right? So for n equal to 5, when I is 0, the number of asterisks is 2 multiplied by n minus 1. Then when I equal to 1, it is 2 multiplied by n minus 1, which is the number of asterisks in the previous row, minus 2. Then for I equal to 2, it is minus 4, because previous one had minus 2, minus 2 minus 2 is minus 4, and that is how we got this, right? So this part of the expression is constant. This is just 2n minus 1, right? But this part is changing. So if we take a look at this part and compare it with the value of I, we would notice a clear pattern. That is, this part is just twice of I, right? So if I is 1, this is 2, I is 2, this is 4, I is 3, this is 6, and so on, right? So can we write all of this down this way? Can we say 2n minus 1 minus 2I? Can we say this? We can, right? So this expression would give us the number of asterisks that we need to print given the value of n and the value of I, that is the row that we are on. And since we know this, can we now print these many asterisks in a given row? We can, right? So let's say that expression evaluated to 9. What we will have to do is we'll have to run a loop 9 times, and we would need to just print an asterisk in every iteration, right? And that would take care of printing the asterisk in that row, correct? So keep this expression in mind. But before we go to IntelliJ and write the code for this, let's simplify this a little bit. Now, can we write this as 2n minus 2i minus 1? We can, right? Then can we say 2 multiplied by n minus I minus 1, right? This expression is just a simpler form of this, right? So with all of these discussed, we can now go to IntelliJ and we can start writing the code. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new Java class and call it Q4. And over here, let's copy the main method and let's paste it. Now we would need to print these many spaces, right? But this part of the code would change. What we would have to do is we would have to determine the number of space that we are supposed to print. So let's say here we are counting the number of spaces. Let's take a variable called space count, and we know the expression is 2 multiplied by n minus I minus 1, right? Now, since we know space count, and let's say it came out to be 9, there are two ways in which we can go about it. Start from 1, go all the way up to 9. That is 1, 2, 9, including 9. Or start from 0 and go all the way up to 8. So let's say we start from 0 to keep it consistent with the other loop that we have over here. So we'll say j equal to 0, j less than space count, j plus plus. And all that we will have to do here is say system.out.print an asterisk. And that is all. So with this, if I run the code, I should get the output that we expect. And we got the output that we expected. So with this, we have solved this question, right? So now let us move on to the next question from the list. So for n equal to 5, this is what we are supposed to print. Now, whatever we had discussed over here would hold for this as well in a way. That is, what we had discussed was in the previous question for I equal to 0, we were supposed to print 9 asterisk. But over here, instead of the asterisk, we would print some letter, right? So when I is equal to 0, we would print that letter 9 times. I1, we would print that letter 7 times. 2, 5, 3, 3, and 4, 1, right? So we can keep this intact and use it to solve this question. The only thing that we would need to determine is the letter that we are supposed to print in that row, right? And for that, if we take a look at this question that we had solved, we would notice that when I is 0, we were printing E, right? Which is what we are doing here as well. And for I1, we were printing D, I2, C, then B, and then for last row, A, which is exactly what we are doing over here, right? So what I'm saying is we can use the discussion from the previous question to determine the number of times we would have to print a letter in a given row, plus the discussion from this question to determine the letter that we are supposed to print in any given row, and we can combine them and solve this question, right? So since both of them are discussed, let's jump to IntelliJ and let's first of all create a new Java class, call it Q5, and let's copy the main method from Q4. So let's paste it over here. Now, what we would need to change is what we are printing, right? And by the way, this would not be space count either here or in question 4. This would be, let's say, character count. And let's change it here as well. Let's say character count. And let's come to Q5 and let's do the same thing. So in Q4, we were printing asterisk, right? Over here, we know that we are supposed to print a letter. And to get the letter that we are supposed to print, what we can do is use a discussion we had for question 2. So in question 2, this is how we were determining the letter to print. So let's copy this. Let's come back over here. And instead of printing an asterisk, let us just print the letter. So with these changes done, if I run the code, what do we expect? So this is what we get, which is exactly what we had expected, right? So looks like we have solved this question as well. Now let us move on to the next question. So for n equal to 5, this is what we are supposed to print, right? Now over here, the discussion that we had about this portion would remain the same. That is, when I equal to 0, we need to print 9 characters. In the last question, it was the same letter whole throughout the row, but in this question, it is starting from A and going all the way up to I. Then when I is 1, we need to print 7 characters. In the last question, it was the same letter, but here it starts from A, goes all the way up to G. And this is how it goes, right? So how do we print this? Well, if you notice, in each row, we are starting from A, right? But we are ending at a different letter in each row. And if you take a look at the letter we are ending in that row and compare it with the number of iterations that we would need for that row, you would see a pattern. See, we are ending at letter I, which is the ninth letter of the English alphabet, and we are iterating for 9 times in total. Here, we are ending at letter G, which is the seventh letter, and we are iterating for 7 times in total. Ending at E, fifth letter, iterating 5 times in total, and the same thing holds true for rest of the rows. So this is what I'm saying. So for I equal to 0, we would need to iterate for 9 times. And when I say iterate for 9 times, it is to print these letters. These spaces would be taken care of separately. So when we are done printing the required number of spaces, we would need to iterate a certain number of times. And that is what this is, right? Now we need to iterate 9 times to print from A to I, right? Which is the first letter of the English alphabet all the way up to the ninth letter. Similarly, we need to iterate 7 times to print from A to G, which is again the first letter all the way up to the seventh letter, right? So let's expand on just one of the rows to be able to understand what to do. So over here, what I was saying is when I is 0, we need to iterate 9 times, which means we'll have a loop, say J, which would go from 0 all the way up to 8, right? Because we need to iterate 9 times and we are starting from 0, it will stop at 8, right? And we need to print A all the way up to I. So when I is 0, we would print A, then I1 print B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I, right? And something similar would hold true if you take a look at the other rows also. So if we need to iterate 7 times, it would go from 0 all the way up to 6, right? And we would be printing from A all the way up to G, correct? For the third row, it would iterate for 5 times. So from 0 all the way up to 4. For the fourth row, it would iterate for 3 times. So from 0 all the way up to 2 and so on, right? So all that we will have to do is determine the number of times the inner loop would iterate, which we know how to do. And then in each iteration, what we are going to print is in a way fixed. In the first iteration, we are going to print A, second B, third C, and so on. So now all that we will have to do is relate this with this, which is pretty simple. So over here, what's happening is this is just A plus 0, right? This is A plus 1. This is A plus 2, and so on, right? Because let's take this one for example. A is 65 plus 2 would give you 67. If you convert that back to a character, you would get C, right? And this would hold true for all of these. So in short, what would happen is we are just printing A plus J. That's all, right? So summarizing all of this, what we would have to do is we would have to iterate 5 times for 5 rows. Then we would iterate certain number of times for printing these things in each row, right? In the first part, we would print the required number of spaces. Then in the second part, we would print the rest of the characters that we are supposed to print in that row, right? Now, for that, we know that in the first row, we would iterate 9 times, then second row 7, third row 5, and so on. And when we iterate in the inner loop, that is, let's say J, starting from 0 and going all the way up to 8, we can determine what to print with the help of this expression, which is A plus J. So with all of this discussed, let's come back here to IntelliJ and let me create a new Java class. Let's call it Q6. Let's copy the main method from here and let's paste it here. Now, on the basis of whatever we had discussed, what will we have to do is we will have to print a plus j, right? So instead of printing letter, we would say a plus j. And this would need to be typecasted to char, right? So if I run the code now, what do we get? Well, this is what we get, which is exactly what we needed. And let's come back here. And over here, if you see, the variable letter is not getting used anymore. So let's get rid of this. And with this, we have solved the second last question from our list. Now let's move on to the last question that we have. So this is what we're supposed to print for n equal to 5. In the first row, what are we doing is we're printing one space, then asterisk space, two space, and so on. In the second row, we're printing two spaces first, and then one space, asterisk space, and so on. In the third row, that is when I is 2, we're printing four spaces, and then one space, asterisk space, and so on. When I is 3, that is fourth row, we're printing six spaces, then rest of the pattern. Then when I is 4, that is in the fifth row, we're printing eight spaces, and then we are printing one. So like the other question that we had solved, here as well, we will need to print a few spaces at the beginning of the row, and then the rest of the row would be printed, right? So if we take a look at this, when I is 0, we're printing no spaces. So let me put that information down here. I is 0, no spaces. I1, 2 space. I2, 4 space. So when I is 1, 2 space. When I is 2, 4 spaces. Then when I is 3, 6 space. And I is 4, 8 spaces. So when I is 3, 6 spaces. I is 4, 8 spaces, right? Now, if we try to find a relation between I and S, that is pretty simple. The number of spaces that we are supposed to print is just twice of I, right? So I is 0, spaces is 0. 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, 6, and 4, 8, correct? So for n equal to 5, what we will have to do is we need to iterate 5 times, starting from 0 all the way up to 4 to take care of each of the rows. And then the first thing that we will do is print the required number of spaces. So let us write the pseudocode for this. And that would look like this. We will have for I 0, I is less than n, I plus plus. Then what are we supposed to do is print the required number of spaces, right? And that is twice of I. So what we can do first is we can count the number of spaces with this expression, and then we can iterate from 0 to less than space count. And in each iteration, what we can do is just print a space, right? So this would take care of printing the required number of spaces. And then we will leave the cursor there, right? Because what we are supposed to do is we're supposed to continue from there and print for the remaining portion of the row, right? And that is why we are putting system.out.print. Now over here, we will have another loop, and that is what we're going to talk about now. So in the first row, what are we doing is we're printing numbers from 1 to 5, right? And between 1 and 2, what we say is we have a space, an asterisk, and another space. Then between 2 and 3 also, we have a space, an asterisk, and another space. So can we say that between any pair of number here in the first row, we will have a space, an asterisk, and a space? We can, right? This holds true for all of the pair of numbers that we have over here, as in all of the consecutive pair, that is 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and 4, 5. The same thing holds true for this row as well, that is the second row, and for the third row, for the fourth row, and the last row as well, because the last row has got just one number, there's no asterisk over here, right? So to determine how to print this, let's take just the first row as an example. So this is how the first row would look like. And what are we doing is we're printing 1 and a space, asterisk and a space, 2 and a space, and so on. right? Now, on the basis of the discussion that we had in the previous questions, we know that we can take care of this by printing 1 and space together. Similarly, by printing asterisk and space together, and so on, right? So can we say that this is how we're going to deal with it? So we'll print 1 and space together, that is in one iteration, and then asterisk and space together in one iteration, and so on, right? Which means to be able to handle this, how many iterations would we need? We would need a total of 9 iterations, right? And the number of iterations required can be determined by this. It would be 2 multiplied with n minus I minus 1, right? And for now, let's just put the variable as iteration count, which is IC. And what are we going to do next is we're going to take a variable, say j, start that from 0, go all the way up to IC, right? So we'll say j less than IC, j plus plus. And what is going to happen for n 5 and I 0 is it will be 5 minus 0, which is 5, multiplied by 2 is 10, minus 1 is 9, right? And because IC is 9, we'll go from 0 all the way up to 8, which is what we need for the first row, right? So at least for the first row, this looks fine. So let's keep this and let's discuss further. Now, if we take a look at the first row, what would we observe is when j is 0, what we are printing is 1 followed by a space, right? And when j is 1, we will print asterisk followed by a space. Then when j is 2, we will print 2 space. When j is 3, we will print asterisk space. Then when j is 4, we're going to print 3 space. J is 5, we're going to print asterisk space. For 6, we're going to print 4 space. For 7, asterisk space. And lastly, for 8, we're going to print 5 space, right? Now, if you take a look at this, that is the value of j that we will have and what we are going to print given any value of j, you'll notice something. And that is when j is an odd number, we're printing an asterisk and a space, right? So can we continue this code? And can we say this? If j mod 2 not equal to 0, what are we supposed to print is an asterisk and a space, right? Else, what are we supposed to print is a number and a space. And that is something we are yet to determine, right? So having figured this out, let us focus our attention to this. Now over here, what do you see? You see that when j is 0, we're printing 1. When j is 2, we're printing 2. J is 4, we're printing 3, and so on, right? Now, what pattern can you observe over here? Well, can I say that if I take j by 2, what I'll get is 0 over here, 1, 2, 3, and 4 here, right? And if I add 1 to it, what do I get? 0 plus 1, which is what we're supposed to print there. If I add 1 over here, I get 1 plus 1, which is 2, which is what we're supposed to print here. Then 2 plus 1, which is 3. 3 plus 1, which is 4. And finally, 4 plus 1, which is 5. So what I mean is that when j is an even number, and in that case, if we divide j by 2 and then add 1 to it, we will get what we are supposed to print for that value of j, right? So if we come back to the pseudocode that we were writing, over here, can we say that the number that we are supposed to print, let's say n, or let's take it as num, will be j by 2 plus 1. And once we have this number, all we will have to do is print num plus a space, and that is all, right? And of course, we'll have to put a println over here. And with this, we'll be done with the code, right? So having discussed this, let us come back to IntelliJ. And over here, let's create a new Java class. Let's name this as Q7. And let's grab the main method from Q6. Now here n is 5 and the number of spaces that we're going to print would be there, but the number of spaces that we will print will increase. And on the basis of whatever we have discussed, it will be 2 multiplied by I, right? So let's say I have a variable called space count and I initialize this to 2 multiplied by I. And instead of going from 0 up to I go from 0 up to space count, right? So printing the spaces at the beginning of the row is taken care of. The next thing to do is print the characters, right? And here it should not be space count. We should change it here also, but let's leave it for now. Over here, what are we supposed to do is we're supposed to count the number of characters and the expression is going to be the same, right? Which means this loop would be the same. The one thing that would change is what we are printing, right? And to determine what to print, we will first of all have to determine if j is an even number or an odd number. And on the basis of whatever we have discussed, if j is an odd number, what we will have to do is we will have to print asterisk and a space. And if j is an even number, we will first of all have to determine the number that we are supposed to print in that iteration, which we can do by using this expression, which is j by 2 plus 1. And then we'll say system.out.print here and here as well. We'll say num plus a space. And this is all. With this, if I run the code, this is what we get, which is exactly what we wanted. So with this, we have solved the last question from the list, and that brings us to the end of the video. So I hope I've been able to teach you something new and useful. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.